Welcome back to another episode of Ash Grove's Forgotten History. Today we're just past the intersection of the railroad track and Mill Street, and behind us is the ruins of what was once Ash Grove's flour milling complex. And here on January 17th of 1920, a crisis was going to unfold. Stay with us for the rest of the story. You know, today we take for granted when we go into our houses and we flip the light switch and the lights come on and we have power. But that wasn't a luxury at the turn of the century in Ash Grove. In 1909, a power system is proposed to be installed here in Ash Grove, and we see the City Council approve it in late 1909. And by December of 1910, the power has been turned on in Ash Grove, and it becomes a huge hit. Businesses are quick to adopt this new, technology. The city goes on to install street lamps downtown, and Ash Grove is loving life with power. And it's going to be good times for the next 10 years. Until January 17th, 1920, when a power crisis is going to erupt on the west side of town. January 17th, 1920, at the flour mill, which was also the location of Ash Grove's electric plant. It was an oil-burning, electric-powered plant. It catches fire, and it burns to the ground. And, this is a huge deal for Ash Grove. For a decade, Ash Grove had enjoyed the comfort of flipping the light switches, and houses were being wired with electricity. And all of a sudden, in one night, the power plant catches fire. And it's kind of interesting to read through the Ash Grove Commonwealth newspapers, because in the January 1st edition of the Commonwealth, they were always telling, look at what we did in the last year and look at all the great things to come in 1920. Well, then the headline the second week of January is the power plant burning. This is major news in Ash Grove, and it sets Ash Grove into a crisis. So the power plant burns, and the mayor reaches out to the owner of the power plant, who didn't live in Ash Grove. He lived out of town, out of state actually. And they said, hey, the power plant's burned down. We need to get the electric turned back onto the city. What's the plan? And he said, well, actually, there is no plan. I'm not going to rebuild. I'm getting out of the power business. And what's actually kind of interesting about this story is that Greenfield, also the second week of January 1920, their power plant burned, but it was so quick to be rebuilt. That wasn't the case for Ash Grove. We have a little bit of a crisis here in Ash Grove because we've got no power. And we have people that have homes that are relying on power. We've got streetlights, all these things that have been developed in the last 10 years, and they're not working. And what do you do? So the mayor says, hey, maybe we can buy the power lines from this gentleman that owns them. And the gentleman says, yeah, that sounds great. We'll get them appraised, and, I'll sell them to you for a fair price. Well, as the weeks go by in the paper, Ash Grove is still without power, and this gentleman, the appraiser, hasn't been here yet, and the mayor keeps reaching out, when's the appraiser going to come? And finally, the city has had enough of waiting on this out-of-town gentleman to get his power lines approved, or get appraised. And the city decides to take matters into their own hands. They had seen how during World War I that the U.S. government took over the railroads and used them for their own benefit, shipping war materials. And the city thought, we can do the same exact thing with the power lines. So the city seizes the power lines, and they actually strike a deal with the lime company on the west side of town that they would tap into their generators and provide power to the city. It's kind of a temporary thing, and the agreement that they had struck was that the city would manage the lines and would manage the billing, and they would let the power company provide power, and then the city would just pay the power, the lime company for the power. And the city wasn't really in a position to do that. And it makes life kind of complicated for the city workers. The lime company didn't really seem to mind because, they're making some money off it. They actually go on to upgrade their equipment to be able to provide Ash Grove Power full time. And it's not until October of 1920 that the appraiser finally shows up in Ash Grove and appraises the power lines at $7,000. And the city thought that that was just an outrageous amount of money and that they weren't going to pay it. So months go by, the lime company is still providing power, and the city is still being the billing department. By 1927, the city and the lime company are still in this agreement to run the electric company or electric service here in Ash Grove. However, the city is almost losing money trying to keep track of, delinquent bills, who's paid, who's not paid. The city wasn't really set up to be running this electric company. So finally in 1927, they strike a deal with the Empire Electric Company to sell the lines to them, and that finally really ended the crisis here in Ash Grove. And it's one of the stories today, it's so quick forgotten, but imagine if you were a resident in Ash Grove, in January of 1920 when the lights went out, and they almost went out for good.